The year is 2012. I just finished my freshman year of high school and it was now summer. By this point in time, I've been reading webcomics more regularly, such as Alternate and Todd Allison and the Petunia Violet, both created by Nosmo. Now, this video isn't really about these webcomics, but I bring them up anyways as I was a fan of Nosmo's work and would often browse their Tumblr. And one day while browsing, I came across a reblog for a different comic, one that I haven't seen before but piqued my interest nonetheless. Not really caring about immediately jumping into a comic's most recent page without any prior reading, I decided to check the update out, and, well, I became obsessed. Best Friends Forever, written and illustrated by Quinn, is one of my favorite webcomics of all time, like no joke. When I tell you I was obsessed with this comic, I really do mean it. There was just something about it that gave high school me everything I wanted and needed. Like, I just quickly latched onto these characters and their story and never turned back. Which kind of made the comic's temporary disappearance years later all the more gut-wrenching for me, but I'm getting way ahead of myself. First starting in January of 2011, Best Friends Forever follows two characters, Vincent Fox, the popular school quarterback on scholarship, and Theodore Bijapur, or Teddy for short, the nerdy but fashionable and extremely wealthy student council president. And well, they're best friends. Boom, plot summary over. Except there is one question. Are they something more than best friends? That's right, this is very much a gay will they or won't they kind of story, which only made me even more invested as I, a fellow gay, wanted these two to get together, like, really badly. But whether they actually end up together isn't something I plan to reveal. As much as I want to gush about this webcomic's story from start to finish, I'd much rather you'd check it out for yourself. Discover and enjoy the story rather than me spoiling it for you. That and this video would be pretty long if I were to cover it on a chapter by chapter basis, so yeah. Link to where you can read the comic will be in the description below. The comic is intended for a mature audience overall, but I'll get into that a bit more later on. To give you more to chew on beyond my bare-bones summary of before, the setting is Victoria High, a very prestigious private school located somewhere in New Jersey. Pretty much everyone here comes from a billionaire or millionaire family, except for Vincent, who is on the poorer side and works multiple minimum wage jobs just to stay afloat. Fortunately though, his music scholarship allows him to attend Victoria and, over time, he blossoms into this popular heartthrob that all the girls want. Oh, and he's also really good at football and becomes the school's quarterback, further adding to his appeal. But what makes Vincent a greater topic of conversation among his peers, however, is his friendship with the student council president, Teddy. Now, Teddy is Vincent's opposite in quite a few ways. He comes from one of the wealthiest families, is much smaller compared to Vincent's tall and muscular build, often appears fashionably dressed, and is a bit nerdy. In spite of these differences, however, Vincent and Teddy are undisputably best friends, and their closeness to one another doesn't go unnoticed by the rest of their colleagues, with some even speculating that there's more than just friendship between these two. Speaking of colleagues, I think we can go through some of the main players surrounding this titular friendship. Camry McLean, for one, is one of the earliest characters we meet. A cheerleader that has a friends with benefits deal with Vincent, though she might push back on that last part. Lois Linderbeck and John Kingsley III is an interesting duo in their own right, stepbrothers and party kings, throwing parties basically every other weekend. Individually, Lois is part of student council and John is part of the football team, but another common link with both of them is that they're both jerks. Lois is a bit of a mean gay and constantly teases Vincent when he gets the chance, while John is generally grouchy and has a bad attitude. Rounding out the core cast is Penelope Bell, a sophomore representative in student council who likes retro fashion and may like Teddy as well. Also a quick note, but pretty much everyone else besides Penelope are seniors in this story, so just wanted to clarify. We also have a good mix of supporting characters like Camry's friends, Bianca and Charlie, Lois and John's football friends like Andre and Silent Guy, and Teddy's dad, Dr. Rahman Bijapur. Not a comprehensive list by any means, but I think I mentioned the more important ones. And yeah, that's kind of my high-level, generally spoiler-free look into the story itself. Again, very much a will they or won't they kind of story, centering on the friendship between Vincent and Teddy, how that friendship is perceived and influenced by their peers, and how they themselves truly feel about one another. It's also one of those stories that starts off fairly light and comedic, but gradually becomes more serious in tone and subject matter. For me personally, I thought this progression felt natural and served to enhance the story overall, but I do want to caution that this webcomic is for a generally mature audience. There are specific content and trigger warnings that you could find on the site if you wanted to, but I'll caveat that by mentioning that those will reveal certain story spoilers, so it's up to you on whether you want to look at those or not. All that said, however, there are still moments of comedy and levity in later chapters, so don't feel like the story will go super dark or edgy on you. It's really not that kind of story. Ultimately, it's a dramedy, a bromantic dramedy, and the later chapters just so happen to emphasize the drama aspect more than the comedy one. One other thing I wanted to cover concerning this webcomic is the evolution it sort of goes through during its run. For the first 12 chapters, its art style is fairly clean in presentation. Chapters 13 and 14, however, deviate from that, presenting a bit more of a sketchy style, with Mickey at the time commenting that it'll help her get through the story faster. This change, however, doesn't last too long, as chapter 15 shakes up the format entirely, changing Best Friends Forever from a traditional webcomic to more of a written work. The illustrations are still there, but now mostly in black and white and used a bit more sparingly. And again, same kind of reasoning. BFF is a long story and it would help us get through it faster. Now, I have to say, while it might have been a surprise at first to see these changes, especially on the format change beginning chapter 15, you'd be surprised at how quickly you're able to adjust to it. In my personal opinion, the format change worked really well. I thought everything was well written and the story still feels like BFF. Not to mention that we get some of the best chapters in the comics history in this new format. When you read chapters 19 and especially 23, you'll know what's up. At the end of the day though, I've enjoyed BFF through all of its different iterations. But one day, it stopped. Chapter 24, released in January of 2016, ended up being BFF's last official chapter. At first, it was just meant to be a hiatus. Mickey got a new job and would thus be preoccupied with that. But then later that year, Mickey made this post. BFF comic. BFF probably won't update again. My day job keeps me really busy and really tired, and honestly, I'm just not super hyped to be posting much of anything on Tumblr or Twitter anymore. I used to have fun interacting with fans, but now every time someone sends me something about BFF, I get a little scared. I don't feel comfortable sharing my work, and it's demotivating and just generally anxiety-inducing. It's really unfortunate for those of you that have always been kind and supportive, but lately it just seems like the fans, who don't think of me as a human being, are the loudest. Trying to be an independent creator on the internet it sucks. I'm over it. I'm done trying to live up to the expectations of strangers, and tired of trying to compete with people whose work has nothing to do with mine. I know this seems like a bummer post, but I'm actually quite happy with my life right now. I love my job, I love my friends, and giving up BFF is something I've been thinking about for a long time. It just doesn't fit with my life or who I am as a person anymore. Please respect that. And then she lists some housekeeping items below, with the most telling statement being, "Please don't add passive-aggressive tags or reblogs to this post. I can't control what you do or how you feel, but I'm begging you to please vent where I can't easily see it." Now, being a fan of the comic and regularly keeping tabs on updates, I remember Mickey making this kind of statement, specifically on Twitter, though I couldn't really find a tweet itself during my research. Suffice to say, I was pretty sad that the webcomic got discontinued, but ultimately understood and supported Mickey here. Sometimes a person's life changes to where continuing the comic just doesn't make sense anymore, and Mickey's new job very much factored into that. I would, however, like to acknowledge another factor behind Mickey discontinuing the comic: the harassment from certain so-called fans. Now, from my recollection along with a few Tumblr posts here and there, I believe the harassment stemmed from either Mickey creating or sharing NSFW art of her characters on her socials, scenes in BFF itself telling, but not explicitly showing us, that the characters had sex, or a combination of both. This probably riled up some folks, as these characters are high school aged, leading to this narrative that Mickey is this gross person that enjoys sexualizing minors and must be a danger to all society. Okay, my response to this. It's one thing to be uncomfortable over seeing this kind of content and not want to read the comic or follow its creator anymore. That's perfectly fine and well within your right to do so. But I always find it weird when people go out of their way to harass and antagonize folks over a fictional piece of work. This is especially compounded when you realize that Mickey started creating this comic when she was in high school. That's right, a closeted gay teenager in high school, making a story set in high school with her own original characters, creating a narrative that explores certain topics within the safety of her own fictional story, and you're gonna assume that she's some kind of weirdo creep? Yeah, no. Kindly get off the internet, cause harassing a real living person on behalf of our own OCs is not the kind of righteous activism you think it is. And so, BFF was discontinued, and Mickey moved on, becoming quite successful in her own right, working alongside Brian Lee O'Malley and Leslie Hung for a comic called Snot Girl, and serving as a storyboard artist for She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, among other things. While I personally had to reckon with the fact that we would never get a resolution to BFF, I ultimately made peace with the ending we did get in Chapter 24. Without saying too much, it gave me enough closure to move on. Of course, this being one of my favorite webcomics of all time, I couldn't help but revisit it from time to time. That is until years later when the comic vanished from the internet. Well, vanished might sound a tad dramatic, but the original sites that provided the stories for BFF no longer worked as intended. First, it was password protected, but then over time I would be redirected into something completely unrelated and kind of sketchy. I never really dwelled too much on these sites out of fear of catching a virus, so I don't remember what they actually redirected to. But yeah, honestly, I thought that was it. I thought BFF would become lost media, remembered only in passing. I myself struck with grief and sorrow, knowing that I could never reread this comic ever again. And then I discovered in 2021 that Internet Archive was a thing, and I was able to access the comic again through it. Felt a bit silly at not discovering this solution earlier, but better late than never, I suppose. For a while afterwards, again, I thought that was it. The comic was inaccessible, but ultimately available through Internet Archive. It wouldn't be until earlier this year, however, that I would discover something truly surprising. Mickey not only made the comic available again, but also provided a written and a synopsis for the comic as a whole. Suffice to say, I was gagged. And also a bit late to the party since she made this announcement back in October of 2022. Reading her announcement on the matter, she had this to say. Feeling nostalgic? I've decided to make the comic I made as a teenager available online again at bffcomic.com, now with a synopsis of what would have happened in the end. On the main page, you can also find a link to a huge pack of extras available on Gumroad, including some never-before-seen stuff. I've decided that it's pretty stupid to let strangers bully me into being ashamed of my work, so I'm not doing that anymore. It might not be perfect, or even good, but it's mine, and the next one will be much worse. I was so over the moon to see BFF return and literally jumped headfirst into the end synopsis. I have since reread the entire story before drafting this script. No spoilers, of course, but all I'm gonna say is that I'm really happy this end synopsis exists and wraps things up in a fairly fulfilling way. It finally gives BFF the satisfying closure it deserves, and I couldn't be more thankful to see BFF get this final send-off. I would say that you're able to access the site normally again, but alas, it looks like the domain expired and needs to be renewed, so for the time being, the link I provided in the description will be through the Wayback machine to access the full story. To wrap this video up, I thought it would only be right to provide Mickey's statement on the comic itself. I started developing these characters in the 8th grade, and actually produced the comic in high school and college. This comic reflects my personal perspective of being a closeted gay teenager in the 2010s, influenced by shows like Pretty Little Liars, Gossip Girl, and RN High School Host Club. It is inconsistent, vulgar, and at times incomprehensible, but it's something I've poured 5+ years of my youth into. It is presented here, unedited, but with content and trigger warnings that I hope you will take seriously, as the comic is also a product of my own biases and prejudices. Thank you for any time you've spent with my work. BFF meant so much to me as a closeted gay teenager reading through it for the first time. It had laughs, it had drama, but most importantly, it had characters I could relate with on a deep, personal level. Teddy especially. I saw a lot of myself in him. Just wish I had someone like Vincent by my side, but we all can't get what we want, now can we? Regardless, this comic gave me the escapism I needed, and I couldn't be more grateful at the time I clicked on that reblog from Nosmo's Tumblr and saw this page for the first time.